What's going on, everybody? My name's Chris. Welcome back to another episode of Bourbon Saying. Today we got a very special episode. We're going to be talking about the top 5 bourbons for new whiskey drinkers, or people you're introducing to whiskey. I get this question all the time. Probably the number one question anytime anyone comes over to the house, comes over, sees the bar, they're like, oh man, I'm new to bourbon, I love bourbon, or I love whiskey, what should I try? And I always have to start with 2 questions. First of all, what's your favorite whiskey? What's your favorite bourbon? This is how you can tell if you have a real bourbon or whiskey enthusiast, or if you just have someone who's truly new to it or has no idea what they're doing. They say, oh, Jack Daniel's number 7. You're like, okay, all right, let's start you here. Let's start you here. Or there's someone that comes out and says, oh, I've tried some Buffalo Trace stuff, so they know a distillery. That tells you a lot already. They've done a little research. They've gone into a little bit. So there's going to be different approaches to how we deal with this depending on the person you're dealing with. But for me, this is just my list. Completely my opinion, what I do when people come over, and kind of how I guide them through the process. So we're going to talk about 5. Obviously, there's many more you could go into from that, but just my opinions. If you don't agree, that's fine, and I do want to hear what your 5 are. What's your go-to when you introduce people to this? So first and foremost, let me grab a drink. Benchmark foolproof today. It's kind of early in the day, but you know what? We got to have something while we're talking about this. So let's get into the rules a little bit. First rule, it has to be available. So this is going to be nationwide and just in general. Obviously, depending on the bottle, distribution is going to change and be different. So this is just in my area I'm going to go by, and from what I know is available in other markets as well. Second, it has to be affordable. So when I say affordable, I'm going to say $60 or less. That's kind of the standard for bourbon these days. And most of these are honestly going to be under that price. And it's kind of what you want for an introductory bourbon anyway for people. The third one, it has to have a high bottle to value or value to bottle ratio is what I call it. So the whiskey in the bottle has to match up pretty well to what the price point is, or better, you know what I mean? 2-to-1 ratio as far as this whiskey drinks twice as well above its price point. These are my rules for this video. These 5 are in no particular order, so let me just get that out of the way. And there's many different ways you can approach it. But let's start with number 5. Alright, so my first bourbon I usually go to with people is something that's very easy, very approachable, and a good price point. Buffalo Trace. Now this here is a store pick. Probably hard to see on camera. And honestly, I will give them a store pick, or have them do side by side with the regular Buffalo Trace just to see if they can actually tell a difference, depending on where they are in their whiskey progression. But Buffalo Trace is always a solid starter. Part of their mash bill won $30. Pretty much now, in my opinion at least, I'm seeing this more on the shelves. Not the store picks necessarily, but the bottles themselves. So I'm going to say this is more available, again, depending on market. But this is kind of the introduction into bourbon. Buffalo Trace has that really sweet cherry profile, almost a Splenda sweetness, and it's a really good starter and an easy sipper for people. Only 90 proof, not going to kick you in the face. So this is where I like to go for the first one. And as I mentioned, if people don't know anything about whiskey or anything about bourbon, Buffalo Trace is oftentimes a big distillery they've heard of before, or at least seen the bottle on the shelves. Alright, coming in at number 4 is actually a bottle I just finished, so I don't have one in stock right now, but Woodford Double Oaked. And this is a very, very approachable bourbon for anyone starting into whiskey. Again, coming in at 90 proof, and the Double Oaked adds another layer of creaminess and sweetness. So it's very chocolatey, very rich vanilla flavors come through. And this bourbon kind of gives you a story to tell about it. It shows you the different things you can do with whiskey, the things you can do with bourbon, how you can do finishes, whether it be a port finish or a double oaked, extra char barrel, things like that. So it kind of gives you a segue into talking about all the things that bourbon can be and whiskey can be in general. And I like that. But Woodford is one of those bottles they'll always have heard of or seen on the shelf. At least the base expression. But a lot of times I'll say, hey, don't get that regular Woodford. Let's move up a few price point, a little bit in dollars, and get that Woodford Double Oak, because it really is worth the upgrade. And for the flavor profile that comes through, super approachable, super easy to drink, and it's always a favorite for everyone. Alright, coming in at number 3 is something I know is all over the place in the South. Harder to find here up in Michigan, but I'm going to go for it anyway. Weller Special Reserve. Now, any wheated bourbon, or not any, but I would say a lot of wheated bourbons would work for this because it's such a light, delicious, usually flavor profile. But I think Weller Special Reserve is kind of that perfect mix of all the different expressions. Like, I'm not a big Maker's Mark fan. I think that gives me too much of an artificial cherry flavor. But Weller has that sweetness that Buffalo Trace has, and it's also got that kind of very weeded profile where it's extra sweet. You know what I mean? That comes through. A lot more butterscotch on this bottle. So this is one I'll almost always pour for anyone new, and usually it's the first pour I'll give them, just because it's such low proof, 90 proof. Not such low proof, I'm sorry. 90 proof, but the flavor profile is just so agreeable with almost every single palate. As mentioned, distribution is going to be a little bit tough on this for some people. Here in Michigan, it's very difficult to find, honestly. But I have heard and seen pictures, obviously, in the South, especially states like Texas. This just sits on the shelf, like it doesn't even sell. So that's why I included it in this, and because I give it so often to people that come to the house and want to try something they haven't tried before, I do reach for this bottle almost every time, and I just love the look of this bottle too. I mean, the label, the Weller label's beautiful. So it's such a beautiful bottle on the shelf and on the bar that it's something I had to include. Number 2 is going to be another recent bottle kill for me, and this is where we start getting into our age expressions. It was a real toss-up between Eagle Rare, which is the 10-year, and Russell's Reserve 10-year. Now, I grabbed my Eagle Rare bottle because I have it, but honestly, my pick on this is going to be the Russell's 10, because Russell's 10 is so much easier to find than Eagle Rare. Even these days, Eagle Rare is very hard to find, and when it hits Michigan, at least, it's hit or miss. But both bourbons are 90 proof, 10-year age stated, and to me, I think you get more oak that comes in through the Russell's Reserve. So that's why I went with that one. And if you want to introduce someone to flavor profile as far as, like, hey, here's what bourbon can taste like when it gets a little bit older. This is the oak presence you should be noticing. If you feel a little bit more of those wood tannins coming through. And when you're trying to describe those notes, I always want to reach for an older bourbon to give them something to compare it to. We talk 6 to 8 years with our Buffalo Trace. And if you put Eagle Rare next to it, I don't get a huge amount of oak difference, honestly. I mean, a little bit more of that kind of creamy oak that'll come through with older Buffalo Trace, but not to the extent of Russell's. With the Russell's 10, I get much more oak. So sometimes I'll compare it to like the 101. Proof is a little bit different, obviously, but I'll have them try both or even water down the 101 a little bit and then have them try the 10-year, and most of the time they can pick out something different. Even if they're brand new to whiskey, it's something different, whether it be a little more oak or just a little more complexity that'll come through. And that's only still a $35, $40 bottle, depending on your market. So I think Russell's 10 is one of the best values in bourbon, even these days. All right, and my number one choice, or at least the last thing I'll usually pour for people of the day here, is 101 Wild Turkey. Now, I had to include 2 Wild Turkey products. I am a huge Wild Turkey fan. I couldn't not include it. This gives them that jump up in proof. And honestly, I'm going to grab the 8-year also, because I'm pretty sure this 8-year is going to be my new shelfer instead of the regular 101, because I just love that flavor profile. I really do. But this gives you everything you want from a bourbon. And if you want to start introducing those flavors of a little bit more age, of course in the 8-year, of course, you get the 8-year. And also you want to give them a little more proof, a little more heat, because everything we've talked about so far is pretty much only 90 proof or lower proof. This gives you that amplified proof. So we can say, hey, the longer you get into whiskey or more into bourbon, you can see a lot of the stuff in my bar is higher proof. And that's because your palate kind of acclimates and you kind of introduce them to that. You can even make them a cocktail, like give them a cocktail of something like a Weller Special Reserve and then compare it to a 101 cocktail. And I can tell you can tell a difference. If you make an old fashioned with a higher proof, made exactly the same, you can definitely tell a difference. And to me, it's worth having them try something a little hotter, even if they go, whoo, and they get sent back a little bit. Because it just shows them. It just shows them what's out there, what the options are. And then, of course, we could reach for something a little bit hotter if they love this. Move up to like a rare breed. Or, I don't want to get as crazy as like a Jack Daniel's barrel proof or Elijah Craig barrel proof. But we'll give them a little bit of time for that. But these two are definitely always options. Always options. And as mentioned, I love Wild Turkey. Probably my favorite distillery. And you can't go wrong with at least having them try it before the end of the night. All right, so I've got just a few honorable mentions and things that I couldn't include just because of criteria or just stuff I like to also discuss when we're discussing whiskey with the people that come over. So my first honorable mention is going to be actually a Michter's 10-year. Now, replace this with the Russell's 10 or the Eagle Rare 10 that I had said during the review or during the discussion today. If I have an open bottle of this especially, I'm pouring this for them every time because this has even more of that 10-year age-stated delicious whiskey flavor. Now, obviously, this isn't easy to find, and price point isn't anywhere near $60, so it couldn't be included today. But this is a bottle I'll almost always pour for people to have a chance to try, just because of what it is. Like, I love this whiskey and always have. And the 10-year rye, honestly. The 10-year rye is amazing and delicious. So, maybe even more than the bourbon I like. It's also a single barrel, so you get to talk to them about the single barrel versus small batch versus barrel proof, all that stuff. So just a really cool conversation piece, as well as them getting to try some delicious stuff. And then the last thing that I like to do at the end of the night, you can't start with this, but I like to grab one of my scotches. Ardbeg is usually my choice. Now, I always warn them. I do warn them every time. I say, hey, you want to try something completely different, nowhere near bourbon, but it is smoky. It's got that peat, of course. And this is obviously the campfire-ish smoke deliciousness. I love it. But it's not going to be my first drink of the night. Most of the time people will say yes, and they'll look at it and they'll say, whoa, this is, it's clear. It's not going to taste anything like bourbon. It's not going to have the flavor anywhere near what bourbon does. I'll tell you what, the second the whiskey's poured, they immediately are taken back by the smell. I mean, you can imagine, for anyone that's never had Ardbeg, it is like just sitting around a campfire sipping grain whiskey. You know what I mean? Probably a terrible description. I apologize, but I like to do that too, just to show them how such a wide range of world whiskeys. World whiskeys versus bourbon, Scotch, and then different regions as well. Anytime I pull out a Scotch, it just opens up a brand new conversation about all the different locations and regions of Scotch and the amazing differences in flavor profile. And this is such a vast difference in flavor. I mean, you get all that smoke, whereas in bourbon, if you're going to find smoke, it's going to be extremely muted or very hard to find, especially for new whiskey drinkers. So I like to do that too, just to give them a little something that they've never had before for sure. I mean, almost every whiskey drinker I've had has never tried this. So it's really cool to have that conversation piece and really open their eyes to something they've never experienced. All right, well, this was a lot of fun for me. I love making these types of videos, but I want to hear what you guys think. I'm sure I missed some, or there's other ones you definitely recommend. And of course, my list of other things I'll pour is much longer and honorable mentions are much longer, but I want to hear what your top 5 are at least, or at least 2 or 3 that you recommend. As mentioned, we have these whiskey drinkers that come over, they see your bar, they're overwhelmed, or they're like, oh my gosh, I love this, I love whiskey, let me try some stuff. But you don't know where exactly they are on their whiskey journey, you know what I mean? A lot of times they've only had the old number 7, and you're like, let's start with the lineup I did today, Buffalo Trace, work your way up. Other people, they're like, oh yeah, I've had some, higher end expressions. You're like, okay, let's dip into some of the better stuff, some of your higher Wellers and maybe even your antique collection if you have it. So, but there's nothing better than sharing your whiskey, honestly, and whiskey is such a great community. I say this all the time, but I think it's the best community out there. I have a lot of local whiskey bourbon groups that are just incredible, great people, and, it's the same with YouTube. I mean, 95% of people on YouTube are amazing, and I love it. So, but I want to hear your thoughts. Let me know what you think. If you haven't already, please do check out my website. I'll probably be doing a similar article to this video just to kind of put this information out there for people. And I may change the bottles because I go, week by week, I change my thoughts on it. But let me know. Follow me on all my social medias. I appreciate you being here today. Thank you so much for all you guys do. Stay insane.